In our last lecture, we looked at the life of Marcus Tullius Cicero, set against the backdrop of the years following the assassination of Caesar and the dramatic events of the fall of the Roman Republic. We saw him as a lawyer of integrity and honesty who made a success monetarily of pursuing always the just cause in his legal experience. We saw him as a statesman of courage, and we saw him as a humanist who sought to translate the legacy of Greek philosophical thought into terms the ordinary educated Roman could apply. His great work, the De Officiis on moral obligations, written for his son, put forth the thesis that no immoral act can ever be expedient. In this lecture, we want to test that idea against the figure of Gaius Octavius, known to history as Augustus, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, and arguably the most successful statesman in history. Of Augustus, it has been said that only 2 times in history has a truly difficult political problem been solved in an almost perfect manner. Once was with the founders of our country, once was with Augustus. And the founders of our country would spin in their graves at that idea. Let us see why. We spoke of the foresight of Gaius Julius Caesar, his ability to solve pressing problems with solutions that were good in the short term and in the long term. And one of his problems was a successor, a legacy. He wanted to be a king, and kings have heirs, but he had no son. And his foresight is shown in the fact that he adopted in his will his great-nephew, Gaius Octavius, a youth of no discernible ability or even promise. Gaius Octavius, the great-nephew of Caesar, was born to a well-off family. His mother was the niece of Caesar, and his father, Gaius Octavius, had a respectable political career. At the age of 18, he went to accompany his uncle in Spain. This was their first major time together. His uncle had recognized him, known him all along, had sponsored him and sponsored his education after his father had died. But in going to join his uncle in Spain, Caesar was fighting the Pompeians there, the sons of Pompeius, there was a shipwreck. And young Octavius not only survived the shipwreck, but made his way on his own to his uncle. His uncle was obviously impressed. And Caesar was going to take young Octavius with him on his expedition against the Parthians. As you recall, Caesar was planning at the end of March in 44 BC to lead an expedition against the Parthians, swing back through the Caspian Sea, and conquer the Germans. But in the meantime, Octavius was studying in Greece, studying in Apollonia, where he had a close friend, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, slightly older than him, and the two were fellow students there at Apollonia at the university, when, in 44, a letter came from Octavius' mother. And it said, "Your uncle, great Caesar, has been assassinated. And in his will, he has adopted you and left you his estate. Now, as a mother, I am advising you, stay where you are. Rome is in turmoil after his assassination. Mark Antony is using the estate of Caesar as though it were his own. He will not give it up to you. If you come back, you will be seen as a threat, no matter how young you are and inexperienced. You will be killed for no fault of your own, so stay where you are." Well, Octavius pondered this advice from his mother, and then he said to his friend Agrippa, "Why don't we go see an astrologer?" Now, astrologer in the ancient world was about like, I don't know, a career planner. These people you go and pay money to, and they give you tests to decide what you're best suited for doing. And so he goes to this astrologer with his friend, and the astrologer invites them in and asks them their birth dates, the time they are born, and a great deal of information, and begins, using his standard chart to fill it out, and he stops. And he says, this is rather complicated. Why don't you boys come back tomorrow and I'll have an answer for you. Well, they come back, and the astrologer, Theogenes was his name, the astrologer turns to Agrippa and says, you will conquer by land and by sea. You will marry the daughter of the master of the world. You will be second in command to the master of the world, and your fame will endure. Well, when Octavius heard this, his face fell, and he said, I'm happy for you, Agrippa, and let's go home, because I know mine's going to be nothing like this. And they started to go out the door, and the astrologer said, stop, and then fell upon his knees and said to Octavius, hail, master of the world. Let's find the next ship going to Italy, Octavius said. We're on our way. Now, he is 19 years of age. But such is his faith in his destiny. Remember, I told you great men and women have a faith in their destiny. And this would guide him to indeed become master of the world. So he and his friend Agrippa sailed to Italy. And by this time, having been adopted in the will of his great uncle, he is Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. That is his real name. Historians will call him Octavian, from Octavianus, modern historians will, in order to keep down the confusion with great Caesar. But to his contemporaries, his name is Caesar, and that is what he is called. And this is a talisman to rally the veterans of his adopted father. Soldiers flock to him. They are discontented. Their retirements haven't turned out the way they thought they would, and they are eager for more turn of events. And this young man of 19 is already a master speaker and an extremely shrewd judge of men and circumstances. He has one of the gifts that his uncle lacked. That is, he is prudent. And so he carefully goes to Rome and presents himself first to Anthony. Now remember, this is not long after Brutus and Cassius have been driven out of the city. Politics are still in turmoil. Anthony is trying to become dictator. And young Octavian presents himself at the door of Anthony and says, I have come to claim my father's inheritance. And Anthony said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, yes, you do. He said, your father, he died years ago. You mean your great uncle? I mean my father. Caesar is my father. Well, whatever it is, he didn't leave you anything. Yes, he did. Well, you're not getting it. I tell you what, go back to school, use your allowance. I'll increase it a little bit, and stay out of trouble here. Listen to me, boy. Now, what would you do if you were young Octavian? You would go right down the street to Cicero, because you had already inquired and found out that Cicero was bitterly opposed to Anthony. And you present yourself to Cicero. My father admired you so much, and I ask only that I help you in your struggle to restore the free republic against this tyrant Anthony. Well, this is perfect for Cicero. This young man with the name of Caesar already exercising this influence over potential troops, he is ideal. And Cicero privately tells other senators, we can use this lad, celebrate him, and put him aside. Well, it doesn't work out quite that way. The name of Caesar is sufficient for Octavian to be given command of troops. He leads these troops against Anthony, along with, on his side, the two consuls for the year 43 BC, Hirtius and Pansa. And somehow when the battle is over, not only is Anthony defeated and driven into exile, but both these consuls are dead. And young Octavian will, at the point of the sword, win his magistracy from the Senate. Well, the Senate has served him well enough now, so has old Cicero. And so, young Octavian now begins correspondence with Anthony. My father admired you so much. I only acted the way I did because I was hurt. My feelings were hurt. Shouldn't we get together and pursue the assassins of my father, because Octavian never gave up that goal. Brutus and Cassius had murdered his father, and he would avenge them, his father. He swore an oath to Mars, Ultor, Mars the Avenger. Antony agrees, and the three of them, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Remember Marcus Aemilius Lepidus? He had been master of the horse, second in command to the dictator Caesar in 44. The three of them meet on an island we can still visit, not far from Bologna in Italy. And like they come together and wrap their arms around one another, hugging each other, their armed troops right behind them. Their first step is how to get money to gain control over Rome and to wage war against the conspirators, Cassius and Brutus, who are representing themselves as the legitimate government of Rome from their campaigns in the Eastern Mediterranean. Well, how do you get money? You confiscate the estates of wealthy people. And so they begin to draw up a list, just the way Sulla had done, a proscription, writing down the names of those they wanted to have killed and to confiscate their money. Well, you know, Lepidus had a real problem with the uncle of Antony. And he said, I want him killed. And Antony said, but he's my uncle, I love him. But I tell you what, I hate your brother. So if you'll let me kill your brother, we'll kill your uncle, okay? All right. Cicero, says Antony, I want him dead. Young Octavian says, but he's been like a father to me. But okay, let's kill him too. And so his name is written down, and as we saw in our last lecture, dies for the vengeance of Antony. Well, it was expedient for Octavian to do so. But you keep telling me no immoral act is ever expedient. And then, with the money raised and the troops, above all flocking to the name of Octavian, the war is waged against Brutus and Cassius. And we find Brutus and Cassius in 42 BC, joining together their armies, having really plundered the eastern provinces for money, coming together at Philippi. Brutus, worn out with work, sleeping almost never, eating only meager amounts of food, is in his tent late at night, and suddenly a spirit appears to him. And he says, who are you? I am your evil genius. He's seen him once before, and the spirit has told him that they will meet again at Philippi. And sure enough, the apparition comes again. And on the next day, the armies of Octavian and Antony, with Agrippa fighting at the side of Octavian, overcome the armies of Brutus and Cassius. In the first battle, Cassius's forces are defeated and he kills himself. And then, a few weeks later, in a second battle, Brutus's army is overcome and he kills himself. And so Caesar has been avenged. Then, having won this victory over the conspirators, Antony and Octavian together are masters of the Roman world. And they decide to split it up. Antony goes out to the east to take over command of the provinces of Syria and Greece and Egypt. And Octavian will be left with the western half of the empire, North Africa, Italy, Spain, Gaul. It is there in the east that Antony meets the beautiful Cleopatra. And in our course on famous Greeks, we saw how she wrought her magic with him, how he fell desperately in love with her, squandered away his opportunities. All the while, from 41 down until 31 BC, that critical decade, Octavian is maturing from a politician into a statesman. He gains the support of the wealthy in Italy by restoring economic stability. He restores good government to the provinces and gains their loyalty. And he carefully manipulates public opinion at Rome to portray Antony as a traitor, a man who has lost his mind drinking love potions presented to him by the Egyptian witch Cleopatra. And with all of Italy supporting him, as Octavian would later write, he led the forces of Rome in a war against Cleopatra. And at the Battle of Actium, in the 2nd of September, 31 BC, his army is victorious. Antony, at the climactic moment, with the matter still in decision whether he would win or Octavian, turns and flees, following Cleopatra, who has sailed away. And the two of them will commit suicide. And Octavian is left master of the world, just the way the astrologer had said. But the Roman Empire has seen several masters in this generation of civil war. It has seen a Sulla, a Pompey, even great Caesar. All of them have failed. How can Octavian take a world torn by civil war and restore it to peace, prosperity, and order? Well, one of his favorite sayings was, "Make haste slowly." Think about that. Make haste slowly. And he understood that one of the great mistakes Caesar made was trying to rush too rapidly. And a second mistake Caesar made was demanding the titles as well as the realities of power. Octavian was learned. He had studied Aristotle. He had studied Cicero. He understood that the Romans, including the nobility, were willing to accept what Cicero had called a princeps. Not a dictator, not a king, but a statesman who stood above all the vested interest at Rome and gave to each party its due. He also read Aristotle and Aristotle's description of a tyranny. See, there are two kinds of tyrants, Aristotle, that most profound and historically minded thinker. First is the tyrant we normally think of, Stalin. This person not only has all the power, but demonstrates his hold over the power. He is like a werewolf, to use a term from Plato, who devours his people. He can never get enough blood, who seizes their property, who keeps them poor and starving, who's always engaged in huge wars. Well, he frequently is assassinated. But a smart tyrant, we shouldn't say a good tyrant, a smart tyrant, is someone who is content with the reality of power. He lives modestly. He doesn't kill the best people and the greatest threats in his realm. He co-opts them. He gives them big salaries and little to do, and most people are content with that. He doesn't seize people's property. He makes them prosperous, because the more prosperous the ordinary person is, the less they're going to worry about politics. He presents a great show of being pious, worshiping the gods, and presenting the gods as being on his side. He plays a part, Aristotle says, the part of being good. Well, in 27 BC, having carefully restored the economy, having put all kinds of new orders in place in the provinces that made people feel more loyal towards Rome, suddenly, on the 13th of January in this year 27 BC, Octavian appeared before the Senate and said, "I resign. I resign all the powers that you have granted me. I want to return to private life. I had two goals. One was to avenge my father, which I did on the field at Philippi, and the other, to restore order to my country. All I have ever wanted was to see the free republic restored. And now the republic is restored, and I step back." Well, the Senate shouts out, of course, as they have been prepared to do, "You cannot step back. You must stay on. Rome needs you." "I cannot. I am worn out in public service." "Please, just stay on a little bit longer." Well, of course, by the time the session of the Senate is over, Octavian has enormous new powers granted to him. And in fact, all real power, all military power, all political power, all economic power is in his hands. He even has a new name. Well, you know, He's had to do a lot of bloody things as Octavian. Now he is being reborn. That's what a new name is. And so he is no longer Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. He is now Imperator Caesar Divi Filius Augustus. Think about that. In our first lecture, we discussed Roman names. Remember? Publius Cornelius, the son of Publius Scipio. First name Publius. Well, Augustus's first name, or Octavian's first name, is now Imperator. That's not Publius. That's not Quintus the fifth son or Sextus the sixth son. Imperator means the invincible one, the all-conquering general. So the very essence of victory is now made part of his personality. And Caesar, that name's too good to give up. Caesar, the Caesar. Such would be the hold of that name that centuries later in Moscow, the czars would be named after Caesar, would they not? And the German emperor would be the Kaiser. Caesar. Caesar. And lest you forget the point, or didn't quite get it, he's not just Caesar, he is Divi Filius. Not the son of Julius, but the son of God. Divi Filius. And then Augustus. That means the one whom the gods have sent. The one who is sacred. To put it into Jewish terms, the Messiah. Imperator Caesar Divi Filius Augustus. But the simple title that he used most of all was not Rex or Dictator, it was Princeps. You may call me Princeps. What does that mean? It is used just the same way that Mussolini used Duce, or Hitler used Führer. It means the leader. And he is indeed the leader. But the programs he puts in place work. He has a wide range of constituents to satisfy. And starting with the Senate. He doesn't fill up the Senate the way Caesar did with 900 people. That diluted its value. That hurt the feelings of these Roman aristocrats. Besides, in the proscriptions, he had killed off most of them. Caesar was clement. Octavian killed them off, and then as Augustus can afford to be generous to them. So the Senate is reduced in number. It is made to be an extremely high honor. And on paper, the Senate is partner in governing the empire. Some of the most prestigious of provinces, like Asia Minor, like Greece, are governed by senators. Though if you carefully studied the flowchart of power, you might see that no province that had an army was governed by the Senate. All of those were under his direct control, even as he annexed Egypt as his personal property. But the Senate was satisfied. It was even enhanced in its authority. Under the Free Republic, the Senate could not pass laws. It could recommend laws to the people, but only the people could pass laws. Now the Senate could pass laws. And the equestrian order? Why, it was made into a formal order of millionaires. And they were given political authority, these wealthy businessmen. You could pursue a course if you belonged to the equestrian order, if you possessed around $1 million in our terms, that led to high posts, such as being governor of Egypt and the army. That was the most dangerous of all. It was on the backs of the armies that Caesar and Sulla had risen to power. Augustus reduced the size of the army, made it into not only a career profession, but also provided an excellent retirement fund and made it a means of social mobility. So you could begin life as a peasant, join the army as a private, serve well for 20 years, become a centurion, and at the end of your tour, you became a member of the equestrian order. And the ordinary person, what did Augustus give them? Just what we all want. Bread and circuses. But that's not a bad thing. It's plenty of money to feed your children. It's the freedom to live your life as you choose, to follow the career that you want to choose. It is freedom from political obligations, responsibility, not having to worry about politics. because Augustus takes care of everything so well. And circuses, what is that but our right to come home in the evening and not be bothered with political debates, but to watch TV, sitcoms, reality TV, professional football, not just on Sunday, but also Monday. And then there's Friday and Saturday. There are even games on Thursday. Bread and circuses is just what we want. And Augustus gave it to the people. And then, as year by year went on, the order of Augustus established itself so well, worked so well, that even among the most die-hard Republicans, the image emerged: this is better. We Romans were no longer capable of that kind of Republican freedom. What we have now is freedom to live as we choose under Augustus. The years went on. His powers grew ever greater. Prosperity grew ever greater. He was a master at solving difficult situations. The Parthians had destroyed the armies of Crassus. Mark Antony had tried to lead a force against the Parthians only to fail utterly. Augustus knew that he was not a great general. He knew the risk in leading an army against the Parthians. So he made a diplomatic arrangement with them, much the way we did with China over that airplane. That was what was sensible. The airplane, in our terms, were the standards, the battle standards of the Roman soldiers that had been lost in Parthia. He got those back and enshrined them in the temple of Mars Ultor. The soldiers had been avenged, but without bloodshed and some vast army. He did try to conquer Germany. That failed. In 9 A.D., at the Teutoburger Forest, the armies of his general Varus, 3 legions, were utterly destroyed by Germanic tribesmen under the leadership of Arminius, Hermann the German. And he understood this defeat. He would walk up and down Augustus Wood, crying, "Varus, Varus, give me back my legions." But there, too, his prudence intervened. Honor is just a word. The reality was Rome could not conquer Germany. It was too vast. And so he left in his will the message to his heir, Tiberius: do not try to expand the borders of the empire. And the people loved him. They told stories about him that showed their love for him. His little foibles. He didn't like to get up early in the morning. If he had to make a sacrifice, he would stay at the home of a friend that was near the temple so he could sleep as late as possible. He was superstitious. If he put his left shoe on first thing in the morning, you know how sometimes you'll slide your right foot into your left shoe? He would go back to bed and stay there all day. Everything that was good for him happened in the month that the Romans had always called simply by a number, and the 6th month, and everything good to him happened then, and so the Romans renamed it in his honor, August. And in 2 B.C., he was coming back from a meeting of a senate, and a deputation of senators, people, and equestrians came to him and said, "Please take the title Pater Patriae, Father of our country." And he just broke down and wept. He was sailing, by this time it's 14 A.D., he's 77 years of age. He has outlived most of his contemporaries and his detractors, and he is sailing down to his favorite part of Italy, Capri. And as he sails into the port of Puteoli, there are ships there from Alexandria, merchant ships. And the merchants run up and shout out, "That's the emperor! That's the old emperor on his imperial barge." And they brought out on their own altars and offered up sacrifice to him and hailed him and shouted out, "Because of you, we live in freedom. Because of you, we are rich. Thank you." And again, he wept. On that voyage, he fell ill. He was taken back to an old family house, and there, as he lay dying, his wife Livia, his wife of so many years, held him in her arms. And he said to her, in almost his last words, "Have I played my part well?" And so he died. He had sacrificed everything for power and self-aggrandizement. He had literally become master of the world. And in the process, he saved and regenerated the Roman people and gave it an empire that would endure for centuries to come. So no immoral act is ever expedient. You make the judgment on this man, born Gaius Octavius, and known to history as Augustus, the Messiah.